everyone. So my talk's methods to increase privacy. It's a very basic talk. It's not going to get into great detail, but I hope I can help to just give you a little bit of the context of security and encryption, and maybe give you some advice about how to secure your data. So my name is Scott Angus. I come from Canada. I'm going to be returning to Canada after leaving CC. My hobbies include photography, woodworking, piano, and finance. I do some derivatives trading for fun. It's very exciting. I used to be a competitive person. I used to sail competitively, dinghies and keelboats. And I used to play computer games competitively. I played tournaments in Toronto, Montreal, New York City, and Dallas, Texas. And I used to play chess competitively as well. That's enough about me. I want to talk about security and why security is important to me. So security breaks are not a myth. I personally have had my personal security violated. Around 10 years ago, I had someone get into my email accounts and use those email accounts to get into all of my social media accounts and all of my personal messages to everyone, all of my emails. All of my photos in those accounts were open to whoever hacked me. Their IP address was from New Jersey. So it was not a good feeling, and I don't think that you should have to experience the same thing in order to learn my lesson. So they're common, they happen across platforms, and they can be extremely damaging and pretty frustrating. So I want to talk about the assumptions we have about our data and why we might not take it as seriously as we should. The first of which is intentions. It'll never be used against me. The data I have out there is never going to be used against me. So I think most of us have learned from maybe our neighbors or our parents to be physically secure, to lock our house, or to leave our wallet in our pants instead of on a table somewhere. And we realize that it can be stolen. But our information, it's such a new concept and it's so abstract that we're not really sure, we haven't learned our lesson yet, I guess, as a society. So definitely be aware that people are having their data hacked. And the perception is what's wrong today, or what's right today actually, won't be considered wrong in the future. So with that in mind, like if you share political views online, maybe those political views will be used against you. Even small stuff like what team you root for, maybe someone in your friend group really hates that team and they have something wrong with themselves, that maybe they do something to harm you as a result. So I just want to remind you like horrible things have happened for really stupid reasons, like Rwanda, people were killed for their last names, or if you think in Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge killed people because they wore glasses. People do reckless things. And the quantity of data, I want to talk about the permanence of the data that you store. So when you submit your data to a website, say Facebook, or to a company where you buy something like Amazon, that data, you should assume that it's stored forever. You shouldn't assume that it's only a temporary thing. So keep that in mind as well. So now I want to talk about who stockpiles your data. So the first is big business, and they don't really deserve to have your data as much as you might think they do. In the past, they've been pretty reckless in keeping it. And I want to give you a few examples. So the first of which is Equifax. And Equifax is a credit bureau in North America. They're in the United States and Canada. And they've had probably the biggest breach in history for data. The names and birth dates and social security numbers and driver's license and credit card numbers of people got leaked. And this was a mass of people, and you didn't even have to be necessarily a customer of Equifax itself. You would just be a customer of their partners. So that was a terrible time for a lot of people because they could have their identities stolen as a result of that information. The next is Yahoo. Yahoo had a big leak in 2013 and 14, and the names, emails, telephone numbers, dates of birth, security questions all got leaked. For a number of people. Initially, they thought it was only like in the hundreds of millions of people, but in 2007, they changed their numbers and they said all of the accounts got hacked, more than 3 billion accounts in total. So that is another big case. Third is Ashley Madison. I don't know if anyone's heard of that here, but that's basically a website used for having affairs back in North America, and they had a data leak in 2014. And so you can imagine if you were having an affair, you really wouldn't want your information leaked whatsoever. But that happened to people, and I think around 4 people were reported to have committed suicide after this leak as a result. So those are 3 major cases. So if you're a developer, data breaches that you can prevent could end up costing your company a lot of money as well. So I want to look at Yahoo. And they were fined $35 million by the United States government. They lost 7% of their share value. They were also in a buyout with Verizon, if I remember correctly, and the buyout ended as a result being $350 million less than it was initially, the initial offer. Also, there was a very limited amount of people who were involved. In total, 4 people were found to be involved in the breach. So it doesn't take a lot of people to get at your data. And like I said earlier, more than 3 billion people were affected, including users, employees who might have gotten fired as a result of Yahoo's poor performance, shareholders, and so on. So can I ask, and does anyone know the name of this man?
He's hiding in Russia now.
He is hiding in Russia. He's being protected by Russia, I guess. His name is Edward Snowden, and he was an American whistleblower. He was upset at the American government, so he was a CIA contractor, or he was a CIA employee, and that's the Central Intelligence Agency, and he was subcontracted out to the National Security Agency in the United States. In 2013, he ended up leaking data. He was a whistleblower, so he was leaking about how much the United States government spies on its own citizens. He did this because he felt that his complaints about how much data was being spied on was not taken seriously by his employers. So he came to his superiors and he said, this is not right, and his superiors basically disagreed with him, did nothing, and so he flew to Hong Kong, disclosed the spying efforts to the media, and has lived in Russia ever since. So I want to read a quote from him. He said, in general, the reality is this: if the NSA, FBI, CIA, DIA analyst has access to query raw signet, which is signal intelligence databases, they can enter and get results for anything they want. And with this, he refers to the data that they've partnered with Prism and Upstream, and those are 2 programs run by the NSA. And Prism is essentially a co-location with major firms like Microsoft, Google, and Apple. So they share data with those firms. And Uplink refers to telecommunications companies sharing data with the NSA. So surprising companies really aren't the only offenders. Governments all over the world, not limited to the US government, will keep a large compilations of your data. So in 2012, as per Snowden, the US government spent $53 billion US on intelligence, and this is a black budget, so it's not itemized, so nobody knows what it's spent for except for the people who work for the government. And to give you an idea of what $53 billion looks like in terms of storage today, that would be about 2.77 trillion terabytes of data. Of course, it's not spent solely on storing data. You have to have employees and people processing the data. But just to give you an idea. Also, Snowden brought up 5 eyes, so technically it's against regulations to spy on your own citizens in most democracies. But to get around that, countries have come up with agreements whereby Canada, for instance, will spy on Americans, and Americans will spy on Canadians, and they'll share the data to get around the regulations. So there's 5 eyes, which includes Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, and the United States. There's also 9 eyes, which furthers that with Denmark, France, the Netherlands, and Norway. 14 eyes, Belgium, and Germany, Italy, Spain, and Sweden, and so on and so forth. There's more agreements with many more nations. So don't trust your government not to be spying on you. So we've all seen the picture of this man or woman in the media, the black hat wearing person or the hoodie wearing person who's about to get your data. So you have personal hackers who want to get your data, and they're known as black hat hackers. So they break into networks and they'll write malware and attempt to break into databases and sell that information on the internet. And they do so for personal and financial gain. In contrast, there's white hat hackers, and they do so in an ethical manner so that they can prevent black hat hackers from breaking into your data. They'll inform the companies that they break into, or they'll coordinate with those companies and really share the exploits that exist and try and prevent any data from being leaked. So also there's personal attackers, and those are the people who just want to cause harm to other people, and they target people for harassment, revenge, or other reasons. And so going back to Ashley Madison, I want to give you an example of something that was sent to people. So this is actually letter mail, and I believe this type of mail was sent to at least 12 states in the United States. So they're basically extorting people for money, well, cryptocurrency, and you can read the threat to ruin your life. And that's potentially why those 4 people committed suicide. So getting back to the main topic, how is data protected? It's protected by encryption, and it's protected by encryption in transport and in storage, and lastly in use. And in use is very non-typical. It'd be if you're working for a fairly serious company or for the government, you protect your data in use such that if your laptop, for instance, was stolen, there is no possibility for a cold boot attack where they take the memory out, or the data out of the RAM. But we'll talk more about the first 2. So I want to go over what a simple cipher is and maybe elaborate on that, what a symmetric cryptography, what symmetric cryptography is, and asymmetric cryptography, and also what hashing is. So these are all very important concepts. First, a simple cipher. This is a Caesar cipher, and if you put an input like this in for this particular cipher, which just goes down 3 digits, then you receive an output like this. But a Caesar cipher is open to an attack called a frequency analysis. And so this is a frequency analysis for English. The longer the data is, the more likely it is that you can just tell what the message is based on how frequent certain digits are. Currently, this is how more modern encryption works. So you have a key and it's XORed with the data. So each of these lines represents a bit. And so the number of bits represents like a string of data. Your key is XORed, then it's substituted, and then it's permutated, and so on and so forth, repeated over and over so that your information is scrambled. Symmetric cryptography. So what happens? You have one shared key, and this key can be used to encrypt and decrypt your information. And you can't use this for the internet because there's no way to decide on the key without sharing it over the public wires first. So you have to use asymmetric cryptography, whereby you'll go back to using symmetric cryptography because it's more efficient, but you use this to set up the initial state. So you have a public key which is used to encrypt, and a private key which is used to decrypt, and the public key goes over the network, but the private key does not. And in doing so, you can do Diffie-Hellman key exchange, and so that's where a base prime number, and its modulus are shared. So hashing, what is hashing? Hashing is basically a mathematical algorithm that maps data to numeric strings, and it's a one-way function. That is to say that it's really difficult to go backwards. You can go forwards easily, but you can't retrieve hello world from that number. And the reason why you would use it is to just verify that the data that's being sent to you is correct, that there is no man-in-the-middle attack that's happened. Man-in-the-middle attack is where someone impersonates to being the person that you're communicating with. So they'll intercept your message and send you back a fake message, and you can use hashing to verify. Some of the examples include those, but of those, 3 of those have been broken by attacks, so they can no longer be used. The most recent of which was SHA-1, and that was in 2007, and Google and an Amsterdam firm, I believe, were the ones who performed the attack and broke it. So in transport, TLS, is the protocol used to communicate your data securely. And the client and server communicate using symmetric cipher after the initial exchange using asymmetric encryption. So that's referred to as a handshake. And the most common is the Diffie-Hellman and RSA, I believe. I want to talk about VPNs. VPNs are a service that you can purchase or use. They're not very expensive, and they allow your web interactions to be routed to a third party so that your ISP doesn't share your data with your government. They allow you a lot of anonymity because you can choose which country you want to route through. You have that option. And they can allow you to operate out of a country where they're not friendly with your own country. So say, for instance, for Canada, that might be technically Hong Kong. So these are some suggestions I have for you. 2 examples of VPNs. They're not very expensive. And they're fairly easy to set up and use. And storage. How can you protect your data in storage? Well, you can use encryption, symmetric encryption. The programs will add an interpretive layer between the applications and systems and the low-level drivers used to write to the disk. The data is then interpreted by a symmetric cipher and is encrypted and decrypted using the same key. And some examples include TrueCrypt, BitLocker, and FileVault. FileVault is for Mac, BitLocker is for Windows, and TrueCrypt, I believe, is for almost all platforms. So these are some encryption standards in strength. As you can see, key size is either a 0 or a 1. So that's a 1-bit key, and there's only 2 combinations, and you can crack it with brute force. That is to guess naively very quickly. But as you go up in the range, 128-bit, there's 3.4 times 10 to the 38 combinations, which is 3.4 with 34 with 37 zeros after it, I believe. And that would take about twice as long as the length of the universe has existed, using a computer that used to be the most powerful in the world in Kobe, Japan, back in 2011, using a 10.5 petaflop computer. Currently, there's about a 150 petaflop computer in the United States, so you can see that while power is growing quite quickly, it's still nowhere near to being close. So you should feel protected, but maybe not, because quantum computers are becoming quite a new thing, and they really can reduce the amount of integrity that keys have. So you can see here that if you have 128 bits of security on a normal transistor-based computer, on a quantum computer, that would be reduced to 64. And using public key encryption, which is used to set up the TSL layer, it goes down by even a greater margin, about 1/4. So it's very insecure if quantum computers become a thing. And they are developing quite quickly. Currently there's a 72 qubit computer that's used for encryption breaking that Google has. But researchers have said that you need about 20 million qubits to break, say 2048 password or key within a reasonable amount of time, about 8 hours. So it's complicated to explain how quantum computers work, but there's an algorithm created by, I believe, Peter Shor in 1994, and they rely on destructive interference of the resulting solutions, and they return the right solution using quantum Fourier transformation. And what should you do? So what should users do? I'm going to give you some very simple advice, first of which is to seriously consider the data that you give everyone. So the companies you give, the hardware that you have on you, you should seriously consider what you store. Because what would happen if your laptop, for instance, was stolen, or someone got in your email, maybe you had talked to a lawyer, and maybe that would be used to blackmail you. That would not be a great circumstance. So you should think about the consequences of your data being leaked, because it's actually quite common nowadays. You should ensure that devices and websites that you have and use current encryption standards, because like I said earlier, the hashing functions that I talked about earlier, 3 of the 5 have been broken. And those are used to store password hashes in databases. So they can be backwards decrypted using certain algorithms. So you also need to evaluate the trustworthiness of the companies you give your data. So if they've been breached in the past, were they negligent in telling you about it? Did they come up with it immediately? These are important questions to ask. Do they seem to care about encryption, and are they forthright about what sort of systems they have in place? Use two-factor authentication. I know this is really simple and annoying, but just do it. There's no sense not using it. Also check if warrant canaries have been used on certain websites. So if you're politically, if you have a lot of political discussions, maybe you want to check and see if there exists warrant canaries. And what is a warrant canary? It's basically a piece of text that will tell you if there's been a secret warrant to gather the data on a website. And certain websites do this because you're not allowed to inform people explicitly that you're under a warrant, at least in the United States. And I would recommend using services that are paid, like ProtonMail, because they've promised to use the funds you give them. They're a paid email service, but they promise to use their funds to protect your data. What can developers do? So developers have a moral obligation, in my opinion at least, to make sure users' data does not get stolen or leaked. They should ensure that user password information, this is very basic, is hashed and salted and not stored in plain text. Secondly, they should make sure that their website is secure from known attacks like SQL injection and brute force attempts. Thirdly, don't stockpile data you don't need, because you never know if your website will be open to a zero-day exploit, which has never been talked about before. And in the case that you are open to being exploited and having your data stolen, you don't want more data than you need to have. So in conclusion, what does this information tell us about data security? I think you should come out of this with more thought about who has your data and how you protect it. And I want developers really to take it seriously and not leave their users' data in the hands of criminals. Thank you very much for coming out to Tech Talk, and these are some materials at the bottom.